thank you, Congresswoman Chu, as well for your leadership on this this issue, and very powerful words that you shared with some of your constituent stories. There are the stories that you shared. Those individuals are not alone. There are hundreds of thousands of people across our country every day that have powerful stories about what has happened to them through our immigration system. Let me briefly mention something that the Congresswoman alluded to about detention, when it could be an American citizen or somebody who's undocumented who's discovered is taken to detention. That means that taxpayers are paying their way. Taxpayers are paying $120 a day on average in these detention facilities. So if this Arizona law leads to more undocumented people being apprehended, then we are putting them up for free at a government hotel. So rather than out there working and not being a burden on society, basically Arizona's new law forces taxpayers to put up illegal immigrants and feed them and clothe them and house them at taxpayer expense. I bet if the people of Arizona knew that, they'd have second thoughts about this law, but that's exactly what will happen. Not only that, there will be American citizens who are swept up in this. Again, you go out for coffee, run your errands, don't bring your proof of citizenship with you, boom, you're in a detention facility. American taxpayers are paying $120 a night for you, and it might take a week, a month, however long it takes so you can get your documentation. God forbid you're visiting from Alaska, visiting from Florida, were born to a midwife, and don't have a hospital birth certificate. You could be in that detention facility, even though you're an American citizen, for months. All at taxpayer expense. I think the solution that the American people want is a lot better than that. I don't think the American people want to put up illegal immigrants in hotels for months or years at a time. I think the American people want to make sure we don't have an undocumented population in this country, and that's exactly what the House Comprehensive Immigration Reform Bill would do, as well as the Senate proposal that was outlined. It would require, the Senate bill, that anybody who's here has to register and have a background check, and they would get a prospective immigrant status, a transitory, temporary status to be here. And eventually, if they learned English, went through all these steps, they could become a permanent resident. But that is quite a long way down the road. And in the meantime, and by the way, to ever achieve lawful permanent residence, they would have to speak English, have basic citizenship skills, updated terrorism, criminal history, and background checks, pay all federal income taxes, fees, and civil penalties, and register for selective service after 8 years on the temporary status. No, the American people don't want to put illegal immigrants up in hotels like Jan Brewer and the Arizona legislature are proposing. The American people don't want to have a large undocumented population. I'd also like to point out the problems that has interposed in one of our nation's most important strategic relationships, and that's our relationship with our neighbors to the south, Mexico. Now, I am the founder here in Congress of the U.S.-Mexico Friendship Caucus to facilitate one of our most important trading partners. The flow of ideas and goods between the U.S. and Mexico is an important part of the prosperity we have here and the growing economy and helping Mexico meet the demands of its growing middle class. And yet this law is hurting our bilateral relationship with Mexico. You know, before I got to Congress, I occasionally used to travel internationally. I'd been to places like Tunisia and Egypt, and I've been to Australia. And on our Department of State, there's a site where they list any country that has a warning. It says, you know, warning, don't go to this country. It has a civil war, or there's terrorists. And I would always heed that, you know, and I didn't want to, my mother wouldn't have liked it very much if I went to a place where our own Department of State said you might die if you go there. Well, you know what? Mexico is now advising their citizens, their tourists, not to go to Arizona. Yes, one of our very own states is being warned against visiting by a country that sends many tourists to our nation. I represent some of the ski resorts, Vail, Beaver Creek, Copper Mountain in Colorado. We have tens of thousands of tourists from Mexico every year. It's one of our larger countries that sends tourists that keep Americans employed and spend money in Colorado. But by criminalizing a whole status of people, any Mexican tourist would have second thoughts about going to Arizona, and it saddens me as an American, having looked at these warnings that our Department of State has and always seen third world developing countries and saying, gosh, I'm glad I don't live there, glad I don't live where this civil war is, I'm glad I don't live where that dictator is. Well, now one of our closest and most important friends and neighbors, the great country of Mexico, has listed one of our states on their warnings. That's a blow to the American pride. I mean, I'm proud to be an American, and to think that our country has some of these problems that only developing dictatorships or police states have had in the past. Not only disgraceful, but it'll really undermine the economy of Arizona. Their tourism money will dry up, and it won't just be Arizona. It won't just be Mexico that adds it. I have a feeling that many other countries will follow suit in East Asia and Latin America, because who wants their citizens to be subject to being apprehended and placed in detention for months at a time? And that would be a very reasonable response, and I certainly hope and join my colleagues in hoping that this law in Arizona is tossed out as soon as possible. Again, it's important for us to understand why Arizona passed it. It was a message to us in Congress, that Congress has failed the American people. Congress has failed to enforce our borders and implement real employment enforcement, real security. And indeed, Congress's lack of action is leading to the undermining of American sovereignty, not only in Arizona, but in many states, including my home state of Colorado, that has hundreds of thousands of people who live extra-legally. We don't know who they are, we don't know where they are, work, in most cases, extra-legally, because federal enforcement has been a joke. This is a solution that we can solve. It's not a solution that should involve posturing from the left or the right. It's one that the American people and the people of Arizona, very rightfully so, have demanded action on with a shot at. The people of Arizona don't suffer too much under this law, because they understand and sympathize with their goals. I hope it's overturned soon. Certainly, if it's allowed to continue, it will hurt their economy. They'll lose jobs. Arizonans will lose work. Americans will be forced into detention at taxpayer expense. I hope that doesn't happen. I hope this law is overturned before that happens. But the shot across the bow has been received, and I hope that it provides the urgent impetus for those of us here in Congress to move forward now on comprehensive immigration reform. I yield to my friend from Minnesota, Mr. Ellison.
Yeah, let me thank the gentleman for